Setting his sights for the DC Multiverse, here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Arrow series, Green Arrow. Following Oliver Queen's shocking decision to turn himself over to the FBI and reveal his identity as the Green Arrow to the public, Oliver has spent the past 5 months in prison, while his team was left behind to protect Star City. He is determined to keep a low profile to shorten his sentence for the sake of his family, but Oliver's limits will be tested when he and Team Green Arrow are pitted against the most ruthless villains they've yet to face. Grabbing our trusty tape measure, we're going to put it to the very top of Arrow's head, and we're going to stop it right there. If I'm reading this right, and I'd like to think that I am, you're looking at the figure of Arrow standing 7.2 inches in height, and that in centimeters works out to be 18.3 centimeters tall. And even though they're not part of the same universe technically, let's have a look at some of the other figures that made up the DC Multiverse first wave. Here is Batman, and just to show you what it looks like, what Arrow looks like against a female figure, there's the Harley Quinn, which I initially did think was from the animated series, and turns out it's from her comic run. So on either side of this sandwich, we've got comic-themed characters with a television character inside, in the middle, and that is Green Arrow. They are sized, I guess, accordingly to one another. Green Arrow is just a little bit taller, and proportionately, because of the sculpting of his outfit, is vastly different than both of the figures, like I said, the Batman and the Harley Quinn that we already had a look at. The figure gets himself, didn't mean to startle you, gets himself a trading card, the same style of trading card as we got with all the other Multiverse figures. And while, yes, Green Arrow wasn't on the front of all the other cards, it is the same very thick cardboard card that we've seen with all the other releases. On the back, it tells you the source material, in this case, Arrow from the TV series of 2018, which my knowledge of Arrow, very limited what it is. I don't think that's more of the recent series and not one of the earlier Green Arrow series, because I don't think it's been around for only 2 years. Gives you a real name of Oliver Queen, gives you his height of 6'1", and gives you his weight at a very modest 181 pounds. To come also included is the same similar style of stand. Whoa, that's a lot of S's, didn't mean to spit all over you. A circular black matte display stand comes treated to Green Arrow, afforded to Green Arrow. It still has the DC logo down below. It has the same singular peg. There's nothing different between this one and any of the other ones that we've looked at up to this point. Yeah, I know, except for Superman, and Superman's was clear. Green Arrow also comes included, like his namesake would say, a bunch of green arrows. The thing about it, though, is he does have a quiver. And that's not the interesting thing about it. The quiver goes to his back. But the interesting, intriguing thing to me is the fact that all the arrows are grouped together. There's about, 6 or so of them. I think there's probably like 5, maybe 6 or so. But they're all grouped together, and they're sculpted in a way and painted in a way that it looks like they're meant to be removed. And the fact that they're also in the quiver and they're not attaching to anything obviously reinstates the fact they're intended to be removed. The thing about it, though, is I don't suspect Oliver Queen is going to be firing off all the arrows in the hopes that one of them is going to hit the target. So really, why would you even have these as a removable piece? They sort of just glued these in place and just called it a day so that the arrows wouldn't go anywhere. I get it if he had one removable one, or 2 removable ones, or even... well, you get the idea. But having them all grouped together like this, it makes no sense to me whatsoever why they would make these as a separate piece. They're just going to float around, kind of like what I'm doing right now. It's like I'm shaking a small drink at somebody's house party. Needless to say, you can take the quiver and fit it to the back of Green Arrow there, just kind of very much kind of like an old G.I. Joe style of attaching backpacks. I think he sort of has it off to an angle. Still doesn't lend why it has to be a removable piece like this, but the quiver can rotate to the side if you want. It's just by the makeup of the way it's just attached to place like that. The quiver is done sort of in the same color scheme as the sides of his sleeves and the section of the front here, which is kind of like a grayish green color. It's a really nice color that they used for it. If anything I wasn't going to critique on this particular figure, it's the colors that they used for the costume. I really like the color of the costumes. There's some issues, again, I'll have with the figure, but from a talking point standpoint, I really don't have any issues with the color scheme. I'm going to go ahead and attach him into a display stand, the trusty display stand that comes included with the figure, because I do have some difficulty getting him to properly stand. While he is not going anywhere, I want to showcase also the other accessory it comes included with. Green Arrow wouldn't be firing off Jack if he didn't actually have himself an actual bow, and this one is all sculpted in one piece. Ergo, it means that you can't remove the arrow. If you could have actually had one removable arrow where it could have simply just pegged in place, I think that would have been nice. If obviously, if he's going to have it draped to the side of his torso, I wouldn't have the arrow completely drawn back. It only really works if you get the other hand obviously pulling on the other side. Then it makes it look like it makes some sense. But for what it is, I mean, you know, for a bow and arrow combination all molded together, it's a decent enough representation. It clearly looks like it's all been molded in black plastic, and clearly looks like it's just been dry brushed in silver paint, but it's that little bit of extra silver paint that goes a long way and just sort of helps to bring out some of the sculpts and molds to this particular piece. You can see like all the little gears and pulleys and I guess the wheels that would work together in conjunction with one another to allow him to fire off the arrow. Now, like I said, it does look okay, but the way that they've sculpted it, you always have to have him looking as if he's drawing it both back. And for that, I'm going to just take him off his stand. For that, I'm going to take off his quiver because I know it's going to go somewhere on me. And we can get everything set up here. Now, if we flip this around, it's sort of, there's one area that seems to grab best, and I find it's on the bottom section here that seems to grip the best for his hand. It still has the big problem that I've been noticing with all of the multiverse figures, I should say, and that is the fact that the accessories are really super thick. It's very apparent here as well when you get Arrow's bow in his hand. Like, it really has a tough time, or at least you will have a tough time getting that actually affixed into his hand. And then from there, you can attach, the other hand to the arrow like that. It's not the most effective, I have to be honest about that, because the biggest problem with it is if the arrow was simply, or the bow simply was not drawn, if it was a loose arrow and then you had loose bow string, I should say, and then you had the arrows separately, I think it would be a lot easier to pull off the look. But unfortunately, again, with this, you have to sort of have them in a bow drawn pose, kind of like that. You could pull this off a lot more successful than I just did, just quickly throwing that together in the last 15 seconds or so. But it kind of gives you the idea that I wanted to show you guys. Like, it looks okay. One of the big problems, though, is you can't rotate his head, so you can't even have him looking in the direction in which he's going to be pulling back and drawing back the bow to be firing off that arrow. And we'll talk a little bit about that head also in a second as well. So again, that's kind of what we're working with here when it comes to the bow and arrow. I feel like there could have probably been better ways to go about that. Having a look at his face sculpt, now this is going to be a topic of debate because, again, I haven't watched this series nearly enough, I think, to weigh in on the likeness of Arrow. Any astute viewers of mine who have watched Arrow religiously probably could dissect this a lot more than what I'm going to do right here. One of the big things I could certainly understand is the fact that the hood, I feel, isn't sculpted properly. I mean, if you look at it from the trading card standpoint, the hood should drape further out, and then it should sit a little lower. You really can't pull off this look because it's got a natural, the way it's been sculpted, it has a really narrow drape to it instead of actually being wider out. I suppose you could compensate this by somehow heating the actual hood, and if you were to pull this back slightly and bring this down, I think you could probably pull off the look. As I said, you would just involve heating the hood bringing it wider out like this and then bringing this down. But again, that will rely a little bit more on customization versus immediately just getting this completely out of the packaging and looking at the figure. The thing also about it is that the hood is removable, and I really don't know why. They've fully finished the hair piece. Like if you look at the back, let me see if I can get the hood off here so that you guys can actually see it. The hair, for the most part, he's a little on the bald side on the back, but they finished the hair all the way along the top, leading me also to believe that at one point maybe they decided on having the hood piece as something that could be removed. And that obviously here it isn't the case. But they've got this weird awkward groove running along the top of his hair. And it doesn't really connect to anything. I don't see a groove on the inside of the hood. So I really don't understand why that had to be the case. Obviously, I mean, that will help to move the head because it's almost next to impossible to get the head in there to rotate unless you were to be able to move the hood off, unless you were able to move the head and then put the hood back on. But you really can't pull off that look. The stubble is good. I mean, I think it could have probably been a little bit fuller on his face. The face sculpt, like I said, isn't bad, but I'm probably the worst person to try to dissect the things I would change to this particular head sculpt because, again, I really don't know too much the source material. And to be honest, I really wouldn't want to watch too much of Arrow. I might have watched maybe a couple of episodes if I'm lucky, but it's not something I would ever invest a full amount of time to sit down and sit through several seasons of it. Could it come up down a little bit lower? Sure. Could it have widened out? You could, again, probably pull off this look for yourself. But I think immediately out of packaging, it does have a few little, let's call them tweaks, that I would do differently to the hood itself. The face sculpt isn't too bad. And I think if you had the hood a little bit lower, maybe to about there, where you barely made out his face, I think it would really add to the allure of the character in the show. As for the rest of his outfit, it's a decent enough representation from the very little that I know of. The coloring is decent. It probably could be just one shade darker. And while in the photo here, I don't want to keep referencing back to the photo, it definitely seems like it's a darker color. It seems also that the jacket isn't as low as this. I feel like it goes to about here. Instead, the jacket goes really a lot longer, and a result of that actually makes his legs look a lot shorter. Proportionately, I think he matches what he should be. If you look at where his waist should be, it probably goes to about there. But because his jacket is so long, it throws off the proportions for everything else. His arms look short, his legs look short, and his torso seems really, really long. You've got the natural zipper forming on the sides there, or on the inside, you see there's a sculpted zipper. Smallest of details, you got to give them credit that they did do as best as they could with the source material. Yeah, sure, they probably could have tweaked the head a little bit better. Sure, they could have probably made the torso just a little bit shorter. But it's these little notes of detail, like the zipper, for example, that really shows that McFarlane Toys is interested in making decent enough figures. I really don't think Arrow was the route that they should have gone. I mean, the multiverse figures, if anything, do bring in, of course, the comic characters. It brings in the animated figures from time to time, and it brings in the TV series characters. So McFarlane Toys is sort of following suit with that. I really don't think Arrow was a character that they probably would have invested in, or should have invested in, at least in my opinion. This whole section of his jacket is very similar to the Batman Who Laughs in the sense that it's all soft plastic. You can sort of feel where the torso joint would be. I can't help but think it's probably a similar torso joint to probably what we saw with the comic Superman or comic Batman. And then, like I said, all of this is just a rubber overlay over top of this. It's all soft and very pliable to feel. I mean, you can see how much my fingers sink in when I put it against the surface of the plastic. I guess it does add for a little bit of additional articulation. You can see how it crunches forward, but it doesn't crunch in the most natural of ways either. That's unfortunate. As I said, I do have some difficulty with getting this guy to stand. I can't seem to get his feet completely leveled off. That could be solely just the responsibility of the figure that I have in my collection, and may not be every single Arrow, but I do feel the need to mention that I have some real difficulty getting this guy to stand. Thank goodness, though, the folks over at McFarlane Toys do include a stand, so you can certainly make use of that when it comes to displaying the figure. Let's have a look at this guy's articulation. And while I would be able to tell you he has a ball joint in his head, it's next to impossible to be able to move and do anything with it. He has the upper torso crunch, which is barely accessible, unfortunately, because of the rubber overlaid suit that they've got over top of it. Thank goodness he certainly does make up for it for the fact that you can move his waist back and forth. His arms hinge outward at about a 90-degree angle, and you can move them forward, you can move them back. He has a swivel on the bicep. He also has a double hinge on the elbow. You can see some nice detailing done to his shoulder pad there. And his hands also rotate all the way around with a hinge back and forth. The legs on Arrow split out, almost a full splits on the figure. Kind of very reminiscent of the old DC Multiverse figures, kind of the way that I guess Mattel was doing them in a way. You get this kind of cut in on the thigh. It's not as noticeable, I think, as the older Multiverse figures, but it's still sort of there and carries its way with the McFarlane line as well. The legs move forward and back. He doesn't seem to have any swiveling on his waist, on his thigh here. He does have a double hinge on the knee. And like I said, there's the foot articulation. It rocks back and forth slightly, and it hinges back and forth, and he also has toe articulation as well. It's a hard figure. It's hard when you don't have too much invested interest in this guy. Let me once again get him on his display stand. I don't have a lot of invested interest in Arrow. I mean, this was certainly a pickup just to complete the wave and certainly to showcase these figures for you guys. In all honest truth, I probably wouldn't have picked up Green Arrow myself because, again, I really don't have a lot of interest to even watch the series of Arrow, let alone picking up a figure that's based on the series. From a stand of personal taste, I would say Arrow is an easy pass. I can base that opinion on the fact that I barely watched the show. I might have even watched 4 episodes or 3 or 4 episodes if I was lucky, and it wasn't my cup of tea. The Flash I spent a little bit more time on, and still I really wasn't completely dedicated to that show either. So I would say loyal fans of the show that love and nitpick every single episode or find those smallest of details could probably dissect this figure at a better, easier way than I did, because I'm really only basing it from the look of the figure and how things come together. Is the head sculpt off? Possibly. I mean, for what little I've watched of this series, the head sculpt is decent enough. It definitely does trump some of the stuff that Mattel was churning out back in the day. But that's the big problem when it comes to these Multiverse figures, and there's no real strike against McFarlane Toys from a decision to pick a TV version of a character. Mattel's been doing it for the longest time. Every single wave, it seemed usually we would get comic tie-in characters, and then we would get a thrown-in movie character, or we would get a TV character. And not everybody is going to want to get every single figure unless it boils down to wanting to collect and connect something. If there's a bath piece available, like a Build-A-Figure piece available, then sure, most people get that extra little bit of nudge to pick up all the other figures, even based on characters that they probably don't even like. In this case, we don't have a Build-A-Figure piece, so it's quite easy to pass on this guy if you so wish. If you don't like Arrow, never really watched it like I did, you probably could easily pass on this guy. From a standpoint of the way the figure's been executed, I can only really tell you that the torso does seem a bit on the long side, and the arrow and the bow is sort of really awkward than anything else. The multiple arrows to be removable from the quiver doesn't really make any sense because, well, you're not going to fire off all those arrows at once. I don't really get why they were removable. And the bow and the arrow together, it is what it is. It's sort of what we would get back in the day with the bow and the arrow combination. They're sort of awkward, and you never really can get the figure completely looking like he's pulling back the arrow, about to fire it away from the bow. So I would just display it in a museum pose like this, even though it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The arrow is defying gravity by drawing the string back all on its own, unless it's a bow that's got AI. I don't know. It's possible. But it doesn't look like it makes any sense the way it's doing it, what I'm doing with it right now. But again, I'm not completely invested in this figure in the first place. For me, speaking, I would say he's a pass. I would much more jump to the chance of getting comic tie-in characters, or the character that's advertised on the back of this packaging so happens to be the Bird of Prey Harley Quinn. Now that is what I'm talking about. I want stuff like that. The CW stuff, not so much. So for me, it's a pass. For the next guy who likes Green Arrow, yeah, sure, why not? You'll probably want to pick this one up and add it to your collection. What do you guys feel about this figure? Are you loyal fans of the Arrow series? So you probably could weigh in a little heavier on this than I could. Based on this review and this review alone, is this something that you would want to pick up and add to your collection? Or do you feel like me, it's probably just an easy pass, and you may want to stick with the more regulars, the Batman, the Superman, and characters like Harley Quinn? I always like reading your comments down below if you are new to this channel and liking this guy's content. Thank you for that, by the way. Make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and periodically check the home page. It's your best way to find out if there's any videos that you may have missed along the way. We're sort of kind of wrapping things up with the McFarlane line of DC Multiverse figures. The only thing short of what I didn't pick up yet was I wasn't able to find the Batmobile. And as far as I know, Birds of Prey Harley Quinn isn't out yet, even though she's advertised on the back of the packaging. But I'll keep my peepers peeled and see if there's anything that pops in local stores or online places. And if there's anything that's new that's coming out for the DC Multiverse, you can bet your bottom dollar this guy's going to be picking them up. As always, guys, thanks for watching, though, and I'll see you guys next time.